The original Robocop is one of those uniquely brilliant films which I don't think I will ever tire of watching. Murphy's story is tragic, action-packed, darkly funny, and always supremely cool. Although the Robocop sequels never lived up to the standards set by that first film, I'm still glad that Robocop as a character proved lovable enough that he's stuck around for so long. I was cautiously optimistic then about Teon's Robocop Rogue City. The game looked good in trailers and first impressions were promising, but I've been burnt by enough movie tie-in games to get my hopes up before seeing the final product, and I wasn't familiar with Teon's previous output either. It turns out though that not only is Rogue City a great game, but as a Robocop story it's second in quality only to the original film, because I enjoyed it significantly more than the two sequels. That might not sound like it's saying much, but stick with me here and I'll explain just how this game recaptures the magic of the original film. And for what it's worth, I also think that the game is good enough by itself that it stands as a pretty great introduction to the franchise as a whole if you've never seen any of the films. Obviously, given that the game is set after Robocop 2, there are certain plot elements that it necessarily spoils, but I don't think that knowing the full plot details of the original film would actually even harm the viewing experience. It's that good. Whether or not you've seen the original film, I firmly believe that this game will have you running to your local video store to pick up a copy on VHS, before realizing that VHS and video stores don't really exist anymore and you could probably just watch it on your phone instead. Point is, there's never been a better time to learn or remember just how badass Robocop is, and Rogue City delivers on almost everything that makes the lovable cyborg so lovable.
Help! Help! This rascal was trying to steal my cart!
Antisocial behavior towards a fellow citizen can be classified as a crime. Lesson for the future: to save yourself the trouble. Clean up on the double.
You can't do it. I was only messing. I could have just picked it all up.
Hey, you tell him, Robot Man!
Going into Rogue City, and based on both my knowledge of the character and previous Robocop games, there were three things that I was almost certain would hurt the gameplay. The first was Robo's famously slow walking pace. The second, his distinctive and reliable firearm, and the third, his near invincibility. All of these things pose obvious issues for balanced and interesting game design, and yet I think they were all handled in a way which almost entirely mitigates the potential pitfalls. From the moment that Alex Murphy became Robocop, it was obvious that he wouldn't be competing in a 100-meter sprint anytime soon. Robocop has always walked at the pace of a snail, as a necessary trade-off for his precision engineering and tough armor. He is definitely a tank on legs, but by design he doesn't have to be quick or flexible. In a video game though, a slow character can be very painful to play as. I feel like I've grown increasingly accustomed to absurd levels of mobility in games. Being able to jump, double jump, crouch, slide and wall run around levels just feels great, and I worried that controlling Robocop would feel like driving 20 miles per hour on the Autobahn. You can't crouch and you can't jump here. You can sprint, sort of, but really it's just a fast walk and the normal pace is a slow walk. In practice, I think there's a good chance that most players will be sprinting most of the time they're not in combat. But so long as you know where that fast walking button is, I don't think it ever feels like you're moving too slow. Chiefly, I think this is because the levels have been specifically designed to accommodate Robocop's slow pace. And while this leads to some strange condensed layouts occasionally, it means you're never forced to cross vast, boredom-inducing distances. The one major caveat in my experience are those rare instances where you have to reach an area which is like 2 feet higher than ground level. And because you can't jump, you have to go the long way around to find the stairs. For what it's worth, I also wasn't particularly keen on the implementation of ladders in the game, but overall there were very few instances where I really felt the loss of the jump button. The pace generally just feels right, and there's always something in the next room or area to attract your attention and slow you down. It's obvious that you're slow, but it doesn't feel like a drag. Robocop in the films almost exclusively uses his Auto 9 pistol, and while he's able to use a lot more weapons in Rogue City, it's likely that players will mainly rely on that pistol as well. Throughout the story, you'll gain access to a decent variety of weapons, including assault rifles, shotguns, and even the legendary Cobra assault cannon from the end of the first film. These are mostly fun enough to use, but you can't keep them between levels, you can't upgrade them, and they have very limited ammo. I think it's great they're here though, because it gives you the option to briefly mix up the gunplay inside a level, and finding new and different weapons throughout a playthrough adds a nice dynamic element. Knowing that you'll never lose access to your trusty pistol means that the opportunity cost for trying a new weapon is very low, and it means that most players will probably naturally vary their weapon use throughout the game. As your trusty firearm throughout the story though, the Auto 9 has been designed in such a way that it never gets dull. From the beginning, in its default burst mode, it's an absolute joy to use. If you're accurate, you can take down enemies in no time at all, and having unlimited ammo means that you can be pretty generous with how many shots you fire at each enemy. Soon enough, you'll also get access to motherboards, which can be swapped out to give your Auto 9 new abilities, including firing without reloading or just changing the firing mode. As part of the motherboard upgrading, there's also this strange node system where you're essentially swapping out pipe pieces to help or hinder the stats of the gun. It is a bit odd, but nevertheless, over the course of the game, all of this stuff provides enough variation that the Auto 9 is always fun to use. You'll need to get good at shooting too, because even though Robocop has some seriously thick armor in Rogue City, he's not totally invincible. He is a believable amount of invincible though, when compared with the films. He takes a lot of hits, it's just that you'll be dealing with a huge number of enemies in most levels, without any other protection. The gameplay loop doesn't ask you to find cover and be strategic, because Robocop can't slide into a room and duck behind a desk. It asks you instead to plan ahead and then use every tool in your arsenal to dispatch your enemies as quickly as possible. It's sort of like they present you with a mobile shooting gallery in the best possible way. You'll move through corridors, burst through doors, and take out dozens of enemies while emerging with only a few scratches, so long as you've got your head in the game. There are some pillars and walls that you can briefly hide behind, but most of Rogue City's environments dynamically collapse and crumble with the hail of gunfire involved in every fight. Once you've taken some serious damage, you can use OCP recovery charges to heal back up. These are basically just the familiar med packs that you can find more of in each level. It's a fairly basic system, but I think it's necessary to make combat feel more punishing. If you just healed over time from the beginning, you would definitely feel a bit too overpowered. Regardless, it doesn't feel like Robocop is somehow less tough or strong here, because frankly you're just dealing with far more goons than he generally faced in the films. It's also worth mentioning that the game has several skills which you can upgrade throughout a playthrough to unlock new abilities, and they all make the experience of everything I've discussed here even better. But I think the important thing here is that by default, none of these obvious Robocop issues hurt the gameplay. In fact, they give it its own unique angle on the first-person shooter model. There are many other wrinkles to the gameplay here that I haven't even mentioned, but that add a lot of depth and variety to the game, including numerous distractions and side quests. Basically, what I'm saying though is that it shouldn't have been possible to make a game this playable, fun and challenging while staying totally faithful to the Robocop franchise, and yet they somehow did.
Naturally, I've heard people refer to you by different names, but I'm curious to hear which one you prefer.
My name is Alex Murphy.
Then I'll call you Alex Murphy.
Throughout the years, there have been far too many games based on movies to count. And though we're no longer living in the golden age where every potential hit movie had a hastily produced and barely playable tie-in game, we still see plenty of these movie adaptations today. There have been plenty of incredible games based on well-known franchises too, some old and some more recent. I think Ubisoft's Avatar game and Hogwarts Legacy both do a good job of adapting their respective universes. And I know I'm not alone in that one of my favourite games of all time is Knights of the Old Republic, which is of course a movie tie-in game, even if it's not a direct continuation or spin-off. But Robocop Rogue City is, in my eyes, an almost perfect adaptation of the films, in that it delivers basically everything you could want from a Robocop game, and in the right way too. It is a shining example of how a developer can create an authentic, faithful, and uniquely enjoyable game based on a well-known franchise. It's not the only one by any means, but it is one of the best examples I've ever seen. For a start, bringing back Peter Weller to voice Robocop means that he sounds exactly as he should. And in combination with his flawlessly recreated cyborg suit, he appears in-game exactly as he did in the films. When he appears in cutscenes too, they've clearly put in the effort to match his exact gait and pace, and the secondary motion of his arms and everything else too. It's obvious in a few places that Teon didn't have a ridiculously huge Rockstar level budget to develop this game. Most notably, I would say, in the facial animations and the frequency of fading to and from black to avoid needing complex animations in cutscenes. But I think in the end they placed their efforts in all the right places to do the franchise justice. And that even means focusing on tiny little details where it matters to something as important as getting Robocop right. A lot of the other character models maybe aren't quite as good, but they are where they're important. Anne Lewis and Sergeant Reed both look spot on, and their voice actors do a good job of matching the original performances. And then there are the robots, like Ed 209, which again looks and feels perfect. There are a few returning locations from the films here too, and they are treated with the same level of care as the returning characters. Most notable, probably, is the Detroit police station, which you will return to repeatedly throughout the story. Every detail that they could possibly have scraped from every frame of the Robocop films is present here, right down to tiny buttons on control panels and the gorgeous tiled floor. There's also the steel mill here from the first film, and the OCP tower, including the boardroom, where Robocop once created a bit of a scene, to say the least. Obviously, Rogue City also features a great number of new locations, which all feel like they fit inside the universe. This includes a small, open-world-ish hub area in downtown Old Detroit, encompassing a few blocks, streets, and back alleys. You loop back to this area at several points in the game, and from there you're able to either continue the main story or engage in a number of side quests, or even hand out parking tickets if you're that way inclined. I think it offers just the right amount of open-ended gameplay here to really put you in Robocop's shoes, while also serving as a pretty great simulacrum of the city streets as presented in the Robocop films. Beyond the characters and the world, Rogue City also uses the original Robocop theme, reworked, extended, and complemented with new score which fits the gameplay perfectly while feeling like it comes straight out of the original film. And I can't overstate enough how critical this feels to creating the right mood in-game when you're fighting bad guys. There are so many other things, big and small, that I could point to which make this such a great adaptation. There's Robocop's classic targeting system, the faithful Verhoeven ultraviolence, in-universe knickknacks, and even subtle or sometimes direct references in the cinematics, where they match cinematography from the films. The sparks that fly out from the back of Robo's car as it scrapes against the ground when leaving the police station was one of the most joyous references to me. I don't know why those sparks are so memorable in the film, but I really would have missed it if they hadn't been there. Oh, and by the way, the game looks fantastic too. It's not really my area of expertise to explain why that is, but I think it's pretty obvious if you look at any gameplay. And aside from budget limitations affecting small things here or there, it looks great and it nails that late 80s aesthetic. And with all that said, I also believe that while it roots itself in the world of the films, Rogue City tells a story which contributes something meaningful to the franchise too.
One parking ticket is all it takes to improve mindfulness.
While the original Robocop film was incredible, Robocop 2 was just okay. And the less said about Robocop 3, the better. For better or worse, after that third film flopped, that version of Robocop was essentially finished. Even though Hollywood adores digging up old stories and weaponizing nostalgia in new films, it's rare that we get a true sequel to an old franchise which feels like it picks up exactly where it left off. Mostly because, and this should be obvious, but people age with time, and so do fashions and technology and even storytelling trends. The recent Ghostbusters films, in theory, follow on from those originals, but it doesn't feel like they ever match the style and tone of that first film to me. I know there's been talk of a new Robocop film which ignores the sequels and the reboot and picks up exactly where the first film left off. And while I do hope that that eventually materializes, I'm not holding my breath. The thing is though, even if it is greenlit, it's realistically not going to be able to bring back Peter Weller's Robocop in the way that Rogue City has. I think that Hollywood has proven by now that de-aging actors is not a winning tactic. Either way, I think that Rogue City fits in with those original films in a way that a new film never could. And I think it does a good job of delivering a Robocop story too. Arguably, it doesn't expand the fiction in a particularly unique way, but I think the inherent value of being a game is what gives it a unique angle on the Robocop experience. Rogue City focuses a lot more than the Robocop sequels on the human aspect of the character, and leaning into its RPG aspects, it actually asks the player to decide where Murphy's head is at several points throughout the story. The first film ends, of course, with Robocop reclaiming his identity as Alex Murphy. But then the second film essentially resets the character, leaving Rogue City with the room to retell a lot of the same beats as the original film, while still leaving room for the player to decide their identity. This is done through a series of dialogue choices as well as decisions you can make in the open world about how to deal with a criminal in one way or another. It doesn't all have a monumental impact on the eventual outcome of the game, but I was surprised just how much I enjoyed these recurring decisions and seeing the way they subtly changed the story. And when all is said and done, Rogue City's story makes fantastic use not only of the returning characters, but of its new characters too, to deliver several twists and turns which keep you engaged the whole way through. I think the main villain here is pretty compelling, for example. He seems to be modelled on Alan Rickman in Die Hard, which is a good start, but they also link him back to the original film in an interesting way. He definitely resembles an 80s, 90s bad guy and a type of villain we don't see enough of these days. It's worth mentioning too that while nobody particularly likes Robocop 3, it's clear that Teon wanted to try and set up their story so that it lays the groundwork for that film by the end. It shows how much they love this franchise that they're willing to go to such great lengths to respect the story even of Robocop 3. In the end then, I think that Rogue City and its story makes for a more worthwhile successor to the original Verhoeven film than either of its two sequels. Arguably, it recycles most of the themes from the original film, and it doesn't deliver on the satire quite as well, but still, adding player choice distinguishes it, and I enjoyed every step along the way.
I hate the day shift.
Robocop Rogue City is the perfect example of how a game adapting a film should be done, in my opinion. I think the same could be said of a game like Alien Isolation and a few others, but I don't think it's a long list. As much as I enjoyed the era of janky, ugly video games recapping a film's story, I'm glad that games are no longer just tie-in merchandise to film releases, and are able to stand on their own as simply another medium for telling a story within that franchise. I think it's incredibly cool that video games have this unique opportunity not only to offer a distinctive way to experience a series, but also to continue a story with an entry which feels authentic to the look, feel and tone of the original films. I've yet to play Teon's Terminator game, and while I understand it didn't review quite as well as Robocop, I'm certainly planning on checking it out now. And beyond that, I can't help but excitedly wonder what they have planned next, because I really hope that they continue adapting classic 80s action flicks. I'd love to see a really great Die Hard game, or maybe something John Carpenter. A Flash Gordon game would be awesome too, and I could go on and on. They have plenty of options, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they come out with. Regardless, I am so glad that we have been blessed with a Robocop game this good, which has clearly been developed by a team who care for the franchise and wanted to contribute something meaningful of their own to it. And I hope that we see more and more adaptations of classic films which get things this right. If you've had a chance to check out Rogue City, then I'd love to know what you think about it. And what other films do you think are deserving of a game this good? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk about more video game stuff. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.